Did you guys happen to see? And maybe we save this for the conversation. Let's save this for the conversation.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we start recording, Matt?
Up to you guys.
Yeah, we're recording, so go ahead, Mr. Giles.
Oh, we're already recording?
Yeah.
All right.
You know, any good engineer has the tape rolling all the time in the studio.
You're the Roy Halley of Record Player Podcast. I appreciate that. Well, my friend, Matt, my dear brother, my podcaster in arms, this has been a dreadfully long time coming. We have talked about having our friend Jimmy back on the show so many times and just haven't done it. It took
many different proposed subjects, by the way.
Many. Yes, that's true. He's a busy man. He's hard to pin down.
But we're also shitty at scheduling. Come on.
This is also true. It took a belated anniversary of an album that is important to all three of us to make this happen. And of course, I'm going to follow your recent lead here and not beat around the bush and pretend like people don't already know exactly what we're here to talk about. It's Chicago 17, which was one of the first cassettes in my personal collection. And I'm assuming yours as well.
It was, in fact, one of my very first cassettes. I always think that I had this record on vinyl, but indeed, I started out on cassette for some reason, which was odd because I was a very vinyl type person at that point. But I think also that would have been around the time that I had like a Walkman. So being able to take the music on the go, that would have been the big incentive there.
My parents had 16 on cassette, so I had already sort of eased into the Chicago waters with that record. But Jimmy got on board the album before that with the lamented Chicago 14. Very cool album artwork. The contents of the record were not as satisfactory to the majority of the record buying public, I suppose. But Jimmy, where were you with your fanhood, your Chicago love at this stage of the game?
I was, first of all, great to see you guys. Second of all, I was Banana Times at this point. It was at the probably the peak of my Chicago fandom of just being obsessed with the band. I bought the Two of a Kind soundtrack, the John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John movie soundtrack
featuring Prima Donna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is a little different, I believe, a little different.
I believe you're right. Slightly different version. Yeah.
Yeah. So I bought that and I played that nonstop, that along with, Just Ask the Lonely by Journey. Those two songs got played to death on speaking of cassettes, on my cassette deck in my Pontiac Firebird.
How far in advance of 17 did that soundtrack come out?
That's a great question. Maybe 4 months, 5 months. It was not. It was in the winter because I remember I would freeze in my car listening to it. So it was the winter, and then I believe Chicago 17 came out in May. Is that right?
Correct.
So I was working. I ended up getting a job working at Orange's Records and Tapes in Bremerton Mall in Tinley Park, Illinois, and I decided to, as a new employee, why shouldn't this guy take charge of this? Put up a big poster having a daily countdown to when Chicago 17 came out. And nobody else in the store really understood, or the customers, nobody understood why this was the important countdown. But I would, and even on days I didn't work, I'm not kidding, I would stop at the store and change the number so that it was accurate on how many days until Chicago 17 came out. So that's where I was with it. And then, of course, the day it came out, I want to say I was probably even in school. And did I skip school that day to go to the store so I was there when it came in at 10 a.m.?
Very possibly.
Maybe.
Seems likely.
Or did we get it that's when albums came out on Tuesdays, I believe. New releases were on Tuesdays.
So you would have gotten it at the store before. Yeah.
We got it on Monday night. So so my logic, so I probably was there Monday night and listened to it and probably just then, if I know me, didn't listen to anything else for minimum 1 month.
Once it got to the Chicago 17 day of release, how big did you go at the record store? Did you go as far as having the store's sign stolen and replaced with the Chicago logo?
I did not go that far, but I did put up, remember when record stores would have displays up on the wall?
Yeah.
The Chicago 17 one. Remember, Chicago 17 wasn't huge until like the third sing. You know, Hard Habit to Break was the second, then Year of the Inspirations when it really kicked. So it wasn't huge yet. It wasn't number 4 on the charts. It was kind of like, oh, here's Chicago's new album. 16 did okay. Let's see how 17 does. Stay the Night's not doing all that great as a single. But I still put up a huge, unnecessarily huge display on the wall for it. And even my manager's like, dude, you're taking up like 3 album spots with that thing. I'm like, it's Chicago 7, like it's still a child. It's 17, man. It's important. And he was a nice enough guy. He's still friends to this day, that guy, Dave and I. And so
this was what I was curious about. Like, I know if you're listening to this and you're not familiar with the Chicago story, you know, with 14, the bottom fell out. They lost their record deal. They ended up on a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. They start working with David Foster. He really starts to tinker with their sound, would be a polite way to put it. And it paid some dividends with 16, but it wasn't a monster hit. It went platinum,
and it went to number 9 on the chart. The album did, but to your point, Hard to Say I'm Sorry was a monster hit, but it didn't turn into album sales at all. I mean, it just didn't. Even though it went to number 9 on the chart, the sales weren't there. It didn't, like you said, it eventually went platinum, but it wasn't like they're back. It was like one huge song that they kept on saying from the Summer Lovers soundtrack. And it's like, nobody's buying it because of that. That's not, this isn't Footloose. To me, it was a single more than it was. It didn't result in album sales, in my opinion.
That surprises me now. Like, it just seems like, in retrospect, if I'm looking back through the rose-colored glasses, that album seems like the one that they all came riding back in on the White Stallions and set the table for 17. And just the fact that part wasn't there as far as album sales, like, I don't know. Like, I definitely thought wrong about that as far as like how that performed leading into 17.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I only know because I was at the record store and I saw it all happening. So
yeah, you've got Hard to Say I'm Sorry and you've got Love Me Tomorrow, which with the benefit of several decades of hindsight, it seems like Warner's or Full Moon or whoever was really in charge of picking singles at that point were playing defensively. Feeling like these guys have their bread buttered on one side, and it's the side that sounds like If You Leave Me Now.
I've come around to enjoying Hard to Say I'm Sorry. I probably loved it when it first came out because, again, I was obsessed. It's a fine song, but I think there's great songs on 16. I think Follow Me is one of my favorite Chicago songs of all time.
Agreed.
And I think some of the songs that are written from outside writers are great songs. Love Me Tomorrow, honestly, and I hate to say this as a Chicago nut job, I think I skip it when it comes on. Like if I have the remote close enough, I might press it and skip to the next song or whatever bonus track comes on after that because it's the last track on the album. But I don't need to hear "Love Me Tomorrow" again. It's fine. It's fine.
You don't want to hear the David Foster orchestral arrangement that takes you out of the song.
It takes me out of the song and out of the album. It takes me out of it completely.
"Love Me Tomorrow" is the one that I'm picking. Like that's.
Are you really?
Yeah, I'm like you. I came around eventually to Hard to Say I'm Sorry. Part of it was, seeing it live and the big production they made out of like, when it transitions into Get Away and all that kind of stuff. But Love Me Tomorrow almost for me was kind of like the lost Chicago song that even though it, was a somewhat successful single, like it just kind of dropped out of like, I don't think the average Chicago fan, certainly the casual fan knows that song these days. And I think that's almost a better song than Hard to Say I'm Sorry. Yeah.
Interesting.
Controversial views.
I do agree that the rest of the record is probably better than either of those songs.
Agreed. Totally.
I think in some ways, I think I would even argue that 16 does a better job of fosterizing Chicago than 17 did.
And I'll even say this. I think 18 does a better job than 17 of fosterizing Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay.
But I hear what you're saying. I think Chains might even be in my top 10 favorite Chicago songs of all time. And one could argue, but that's not even Chicago. It's kind of like a Soteros is doing a solo song, basically. But I love it. And What You're Missing, I think, is great. But we're here to talk about 17, and I'm obsessing about 16. My apologies.
Well, we do have to set the stage, though, and I think that's all important. And you said Cetera doing a solo thing. Did you buy the first Cetera solo record?
Oh, of course, I got it for Christmas the year that it came out, 81, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. Yeah,
and I'm on because I was getting ready to do this with you guys. I'm on my playlist on my Apple Music is it's called it's just basically, it's not clever. It's a Cetera Chicago mix, and it's a mixture of his solo stuff with some Chicago. And so I've been listening really nonstop to. I'm kind of skipping the Chicago tunes and listening to nothing but the Cetera solo stuff that I haven't really dove into, maybe since the last time we all spoke. And
Yeah, sure.
It's one of those things where I'm listening to the Cetera solo stuff and loving it all again, and then go, okay, well, I gotta stop listening to this. I'll go listen to something else, and then nope, right back to that. So it's nothing but Cetera for the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So yeah, I loved that first album. I Living in the Limelight, I think, is a great tune. I think there's a lot of great tunes on that album.
Yeah, you hear that first album and it's like 16 makes a lot more sense if you're aware of that first album. There's a lot of, overlap as far as just like the general thought process.
And you know what else is interesting about it? I remember at the time they went, Peter Cetera is breaking out. He's rocking. He's rocking more than Chicago
He's
ever
rocking,
has. It's like
living in the limelight.
it is not rocking in any way, shape, or form. It's power pop at most. And
Right.
But that said, there's not a song on it I don't like. I love it all.
So Peter is testing his wings a little bit, which makes sense given that, he'd been the
Dipping his
vocal-
wings, really, if we want to be correct
Hey!
about it.
Okay.
Dip
nice.
your wings. That's a nice pull for 4 people.
Yeah,
And
right.
3 are
here. He'd been the voice of Chicago on the charts, on the radio for a while, and the band really was kind of stuck in neutral. So, I really don't know the backstory behind him getting a solo deal as part of Chicago coming to Warner's and Full Moon. When I talked to him in '92, he was a little bitter about his experience with that first album. He accused them of just chucking it out there as cannon fodder. But, clearly Peter is becoming more involved in the direction of the group. We get the solo record, we get 16, momentum starts to build a little bit again. And then in May of 1984, the record that you were waiting for so anxiously at the store, Chicago 17. And like you said, initially the record doesn't go off like gangbusters. The label did what I feel like labels used to do a lot with rock acts, or in this case, sort of a nominally rock act, was they would lead with not a ballad. And I think kind of go in knowing that it wasn't going to be the biggest hit, but it would sort of whet the appetite of the audience, the program directors, and also I think in some cases it was a little bit of a credibility saving move to come out with an up-tempo number. So they do it with Stay the Night, which is, aside from that sort of aggravating rhythm track, it's pretty
Really
cool
bizarre,
song.
that track, the rhythm track. I went back to the chat you and I had with Danny Seraphin, and
Yeah.
I just was like, I was revisiting little kid me being like infatuated with that drum track. Why? It's like, it's very annoying the more you hear it all these years on.
And what did Danny have to say about it? Just out of curiosity, I didn't see
Well,
you talk with
I
him.
was a total pro. Danny was happy to point out that he didn't play drums on that track, so that was where I started. Was talking about that. I don't think it was addressing it at Danny specifically, but just he pointed out that was one of a couple tracks that that Jeff Porcaro played on that track, and then it was Carlo Vega that played on You're the Inspiration. So that that's kind of where that led. But
Wow.
which I didn't know, like, because that was stuff that was at the time that we were buying the records. Those two guys were not credited in the liner notes, so it was safe to assume, why wouldn't you, that Danny played on the whole record. Now, of course, all these years later, we know that, different things are true, and we'll get ahead of ourselves. But like, Jeff, I don't want to get ahead. You're right. Like, it's a very interesting, bizarre way to start off the record. And I think that in one sense for me, because of how, bizarre that track is, like, it drew me in, and that was the thing that made me go out and buy the 45 of Stay the Night. So it had the right reaction. It had the right, like, pull for, somebody like, me that was like kind of a rock kid that, wasn't necessarily, I think certainly I became more of like a ballad kind of person, power ballad, all that kind of stuff. But it's like, I was still kind of, riding in the middle, like both sides. So I think that's one thing that I'll say, Jeff, is that like that's one thing they would do by putting out kind of like a more rock track, like for a band like Chicago, was just more than anything from a label perspective, like you want to keep all your options open. You want to keep your feet in every part of the game that you possibly can. So that's so, but it's and I don't know. I mean, listening to the record these past couple days, like it makes sense as like a starting track for the record. Like it doesn't feel like they just like shoehorned in, let's put the single at the head of the track listing. It kind of works well as a lead track for the record too.
Had a great video as well.
Great video.
Yeah.
And Cetera looks better than ever in that video. And
Absolutely.
it's just they did very limited touring in 1983 because they were between albums, but they would do Stay the Night in concerts. And so, we were ready for it. We knew that was going to be on the album. We also thought a song called Sweet Marie was going to be out in the album.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
And how that wasn't a bonus track to this day, it confuses me. But what I thought, to your point, Matt, of it being a little more rocker, is that they were able to be on rock radio, they were able to be on top 40 radio, and they were able to be on easy listening radio with one track. It kind of, and it kind of does address all three of those markets. Like it's that Cetera voice for the AC. It's got pop for top 40, and then here's a rocker kind of tune for Chicago, even though it's so. I think it did do pretty well at rock radio, right? Didn't I think it made the top 10 on the rock radio, the rock chart, I think it was called at the time. So I think it hit all those beats, and so to me, I just expected it to be the first single because again they had been playing it in concert, and so I thought like I didn't understand the record business at the time. I just like, well, that's the song that they obviously they already know it. So why wouldn't that be the first single? So
and Cetera, like in the video, and just like kind of the image that he projects vocally on that song, like to me, I was like, I don't know who this Peter Cetera guy is, but this guy's the coolest guy in the world. Like he seemed like a macho, cool guy that like if I could be like somebody in 1984, I might.
It's the last time somebody called Peter Cetera macho.
Absolutely.
Although Champlin kind of did in the Behind the Music, where he said like, Peter was buff and he had the new haircut and he was ready to go. And so maybe that's the last. So Matt and Champlin are the last two to refer to him that way. But man, that 84 Cetera, man, I wanted, I was 17 years old. I wanted to be that guy so badly, to your point. Like and it's also,
he was riding around in a pickup truck getting chicks, Jimmy. I mean, come on, who doesn't want that?
Well, I had my hot Pontiac Firebird, as I already mentioned. So
that's true. Yeah,
so I was already able to get the action I was needed that I needed. But it's weird. We were just about this the other day about how they clearly they've been around since the late '60s, and here they are. Not unlike the Moody Blues that they in the '80s all of a sudden have this resurgence, and it's like, who are these old guys back on radio? And it's like they're 40. They're not that old. It's like they're younger than I am today. And if they put out an album tomorrow at 80, I'm the first guy buying it. So 80 didn't, I mean, them being 40 at the time seemed insane. Now it does not.
Yeah. 40 was a kind of I don't know what the word I'm looking for. I mean, if you read old interviews with the first generation of rock stars, 40 is like this. It's like a cursed number. A lot of those guys didn't think they'd still be making music when they were 40. And we've talked about this a whole bunch on the show about how this era, the mid 80s, we're reaching the end of the era when kids shared the top 40 with their parents.
Yeah. Great.
I think particularly with 17, they got themselves a whole new, much younger group of fans with this record. And their parents had probably purchased any CTA. One of the 1 through 14 or whatever.
When the first time I met the band was backstage at Poplar Creek for the 17 tour. And
wow,
Robert had just done an interview where he said, we have a whole new legion of fans. And I remember being, again, this obsessed kid. I'm a high school kid. I was angry about that because it's like, no, I'm a real fan. So when I met him, I said, "Hey, what did you mean by that?" I said, I literally said, I took offense to you saying that because we've been supporting you forever." And he goes, "You bought the first album?" And I was like, "Okay, all right." And
I love
it was like,
this.
"That's fair. Okay, you're right. I didn't. I wasn't. I was 3. You're right."
Right.
So, and in fairness, I didn't. I guess I didn't. I was so like in my own fandom that I didn't even know what he meant in that interview until he said it that way. When I met him. And by the way, he was a very nice man that first time. He tolerated a 17-year-old, maybe even 16 at the time, year old. My questions, he tolerated them very nicely, where he certainly did not have to. But with a backstage of hip and people and good-looking girls and women and so on. And here's this guy going, "Oh, what do you mean you're mad at me? I've been a fan a long time, Mr. Lamb." Idiot.
How did you end up backstage, by the way?
Oh, here's how I ended up backstage at that point. I bought a backstage pass off a guy for $50. And
Wow.
it was all the money in the world that I had. But I was not leaving Poplar Creek in the summer of '84 without meeting Chicago. And these people were leaving the backstage area. And I said, "I'll buy your pass off you." And the guy goes, $50. And I said, "Okay." And in retrospect, now that I know everything about backstage, what a jerk that guy was to charge a 16-year-old kid $50. Like,
Yeah.
dude, you're leaving. Just give the kid the pass. What do you like?
Yeah. And then you walk in, you're like, "I got a bone to pick with you."
Yeah. Then I immediately go up to Robert Lamb and go, what's your problem with me being a fan, buddy? And again, he tolerated it. And, but yeah, it was a very overwhelming being back there because I didn't know what I was doing and just was going up to these, at this point, my heroes, these guys that I've just idolized since I had seen them in concert only 3 years earlier, but I listened to them nonstop. I mean, every day for 3 years, I listened to that band. So to meet Peter Cetera was like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
I'm a kid meeting this, again, the guy that's in the music video. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
What's happening?
I think in 1984, Lamb might have just been happy that anybody wanted to talk to him and not, Cetera.
You know what? That's a good point. That's a good point. I did ask
Lamb
him,
and
I said, "Hey, why don't you guys do question 67, 68 anymore?" And he just goes, "Ask Peter."
yeah.
All right. So
That's fantastic.
You came in right before the Foster era started. You saw them live before that era started. And we're talking now about this. Well, we talked about the drum program on Stay the Night. Like, did you care that somebody like Seraphin was becoming, more of a non-factor? Or
well, I didn't know that he was becoming a non-factor. To your point, like I assume he played on all of it, and I wasn't savvy enough to know what was happening, with synthesizers and stuff like that. I assumed Danny Seraphin's the drummer. He's the drummer on everything, and unless it said, Michael Landau and Steve Lukather on guitar, I assumed those were the only 2 extra guys, or Richard Marx and Donny Osmond with backup vocals. Like I assumed, well, and Kenny Cetera, there's your extra guys. Other than that, it's these guys and Chris Pinnock playing everything else. I just assumed that. And then when you see him in concert, and then, Danny was doing a drum off with Bill at one point, like there was just all stuff going on. Like why is Danny not drumming as much as he used to? Like that's when I first started discovering that was with the live shows. But as far as the album goes, again, I looked at the Chicago Is, the list of the members, and assumed that's who's playing on this record. In addition to, again, Lukather, Landau, and is Tim Pierce on this album? I don't know if he is, but
he's definitely on 19. I don't know if he was part of it this far back.
Like I didn't know Porcaro would drummed on it until maybe today. Yeah, that may have been breaking news for me during this podcast.
Breaking news.
I just assumed that you could tell that there was programming happening.
Wasn't it the sound of the 80s? So to me, it just
sure
sounded
was
like the 80s.
Yeah.
And, I'm glad you mentioned it, because the one takeaway I'll have ever since we scheduled this and listening to this 17 over and over and over again, which I do love that. I still love this album.
Same.
Man, I would love if they would go in and just, what's the word that they use these days? If they do a new mix on it, if they remixed it and just gave it and same with Solitude Solitaire, by the way, those are the 2. Yeah. If there's a way to get in and on 80s, those, man, with those already great albums, to me would be amazing albums.
I agree. And it's like, as I was listening through the album, like, programming versus not programming, even like the stuff that like Danny doesn't play on, which again, like Stay the Night, Jeff Porcaro, and You're the Inspiration, Carla Vega, those were the 2 that he called out. So kind of having that like in my head as I started like listening to the album, like when I got to Hard Habit to Break, which is Danny drumming, like that to me just sticks out as far as what the album could have been if they would have gone in with like in the early going of that album. That song to me sounds like the least Fosterized out of the whole record. Like it sounds about as close to like old school Chicago as you get in one sense. Jimmy, maybe you know this. Like I had forgotten this detail, and I guess it's in the documentary. How do you think that Robert Lamb ever was the guy that was going to sing Hard Habit to Break? Like there's apparently a version out there of him singing that song, and that shocked the hell out of me to like realize that like at one point like he took a swing at that. Like I just picture him like he just seemed like automatically like maybe he would be the odd guy out in a lot of situations when it comes to David Foster.
He sure seemed that way, right? I mean, it was certainly with 16 because he was just invisible on that thing.
Yeah.
By his own making, from what I understand. But boy, I've never heard. Have you ever heard the version of Lamb doing Hard Habit to Break? Were you able to get the
I haven't
demo on
heard
that?
it. Allegedly, there is a snippet of that demo in the Now More Than Ever documentary, which I saw,
Right.
and I know that you've seen as well. Like, so I don't know how I missed it. So I'm gonna have
I
to
don't
go.
know
It's
how I
on
missed
Amazon
that.
Prime, so I'm gonna have to go back and see that because I totally missed that.
Wow, I totally missed that as well. Maybe because I was like, where am I? Maybe I was waiting for me to
Yes.
pop up in that thing. But I don't remember that because man, I know if I had heard that, I probably would have bothered the director of that film, Peter Pardini, to, hey, is there any way I could hear this full version of Lamb doing Hard Habit to Break? Because I don't remember that at all. How weird would that be? And was it just him, or was it not? Was it a duet yet, or was it just like Lamb doing it as a like almost like Love Is New off of Hot Streets?
Yeah, I did not see that much as far as the specifics. Like, it would almost make more sense to me if it was like Cetera and Lamb versus Cetera and Champlin, that
Yeah.
would make sense. But it's like I kind of read that initially, and as we're talking through this, like I'm gonna have to like at least go to the snippet and see what the snippet sounds like because it just doesn't make any sense to imagine a version of that song that doesn't have Cetera.
Right.
That would be pretty revelatory if something like that exists in the vaults.
Agreed.
Because I can only assume that Foster took a sick day that day if that happened.
It's also, I've been hearing, we're 40 years later, just, it's so Champlin and Cetera together on that song. I couldn't imagine, as much as I love Robert Lamb's voice, I just like can't even envision that. I don't see it being a hit if it was Lamb and Cetera.
Can you imagine recording Champlin in the studio in that era? Like, he just sounds so massive on those tracks.
Just, I remember being mad about it, by the way, at the time, that, why is this new guy getting so much attention, and again, not understanding that maybe Lamb had some, issues with the drugs and drinking or whatever. I didn't know that. Again, the internet didn't exist. And I was a kid who just had their posters on the wall. And I just was, but it was like, why is this new guy? Why is he singing all these new songs? Why, where's my guy? Where's Saturday in the Park guy? Why isn't he singing? But in retrospect, like, man, Foster gets all the credit for saving this band, but I mean, Champlin is a big part of that. You got to admit that. The obvious.
What would their sound have even been?
Right. It would have been It would have been 14. It would have been that again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It would have been the Peter show. So 14 was enough to get you on the Lamb bandwagon. I know you love this record. You played the hell out of this record, but you noticed clearly that Lamb was a diminished presence during this period.
I mean, I love, We Can Stop the Hurt, and I think it's a great song. So it was great to have him back after having nothing on 16, to have him back. And then he also, doesn't he sing Only You? Doesn't he do the duet on Only You?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I don't remember if it was that song or Once in a Lifetime. My memory is not, but I saw them at Alpine Valley in Wisconsin on my birthday, July 28th of 1984, which I think was the second show of the tour. I think might have been the third. And they did one of those songs. I forget which one it was, Only You or Once in a Lifetime. And then when they came to Poplar Creek 3 days later, it was out of the set list. And again, because apparently I don't know how to talk to people when I meet them and they're famous. I accosted Bill Champlin and asked him why they dropped it. Hey, why'd you drop that from the set list? And his response was, because it sucks. And I said, really? You think this song? He goes, it's not live. It's great on the album. We couldn't recreate it. So, but I thought it sounded great. And it was great to hear. I think at the time they were doing 6 songs off the album. I don't think they were even doing Year of the Inspiration yet in concert. I think they were doing like the more rocker tunes, the Stay the Night and Prima Donna and We Can Stop the Hurtin'. And then I think Hard Habit, and then this other, the either Once in a Lifetime or Only You. Anyway, Lamb sings on that, right? And then doesn't he sing on a third song? So to me, he didn't seem that diminished on this. I kind of felt like he was back.
Okay.
And didn't he?
Okay.
He co-wrote a couple tracks, right? Did he co-write the one with Bill and Lionel Richie? Isn't that the 3 of them?
Yes, it's Only You, right?
No, he doesn't co-write anything.
Not even We Can Stop the Hurtin'?
Well, he co-wrote that.
Okay.
He co-wrote that with Bill Champlin and a guy named Dean Neal. I don't know who that is. And that's it. I would have gone to my grave, and nobody's asking me to. Nobody. I'm not on my deathbed with them saying, "What else did Lamb co-write on 17?" I would have sworn he co-wrote minimum Only You and something else, but I guess I'm wrong.
I would have said the same. Absolutely.
And Panko's got 2 great tracks on this. Again, the aforementioned Only You and Once in a Lifetime.
Yeah.
I love Once in a Lifetime. That's always been one of my favorites on this record.
Great song. And what a great way to end the album.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, by the way, speaking of Lamb, though, that bonus track is a swing and a miss, right? Can we agree on that?
Here's Where We Begin or something like that?
Where We Begin? Like, man, there was nothing else in the vault? You didn't think to redo this at all? Wow.
And meanwhile, I think that Good for Nothing is a song that should have been on the album somewhere. I think that's a great song.
I agree with you. When Richard Marx did my podcast, I brought that up and I said, I think Good for Nothing's a great song. And he goes, it's an okay song. And I said, I go, really? I think it's great. And he goes, it's okay. You don't have to okay, I get it. You've written 5 number 1 hits. I understand that you probably know better than I do. But again, as the guy who loves Robert Lamb's voice and I thought that was a great song.
I like this.
I'm really good. This is why Jimmy and I get along, Jeff, is because I have been historically really good at bringing up songs that the artists don't care for. And I think, Jeff, you got a good history with that.
Definitely
as well.
have done
maybe
that
that's why
too,
the 3 of us have this bond, because we love to just bring up songs like that.
I just love we're collecting stories about Jimmy, arguing with recording artists, some of whom were in Chicago, about the worth of Chicago songs.
Right. And clear and they clearly know better than I do. Although at the end of the day, I'm the fan, so the customer's always right.
Customer's always right. In your youth bubble, were you aware of or like to what extent even, I guess, was Chicago's transmogrification a burr in the saddle of longtime fans at that point?
By the way, that more so then than now, it got on my nerves. And because I just was happy that my favorite band had new music out and that I could go see them in concert a couple times a year and they had videos on MTV. So to me, it was exciting. So when I would see people, waiting in line at Chicago Fest, the music festival, not a festival for the band, and they would go, they haven't been the same since Kath. They haven't been the same. If David Foster's ruining them. And my argument would be ruining them. They've got a number 3 hit. Like I didn't understand. I was a kid. I didn't understand. I didn't know where they were coming from. It seemed old man, get off my lawnish to me. And also, why are you trying to suck the fun out of my joy? I clearly am talking about how much I love this new album and talking about the songs and you're just, they haven't been the same since Kath. Well, then what are you doing here? And you're also waiting in line at 8:00 in the morning for a 7:00 show. So clearly you still have an investment in this band. So it got on my nerves more than anything else as a kid. And mainly because I just didn't understand it.
Did you like the older stuff too?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I very much did. Honestly, at the time, Hot Streets in 13 and 14 and now 16, 17 were probably my 5 favorites. And then as I got older and just, realized, 2 is a masterpiece. 1 is phenomenal. 5 is brilliant. You go back and you do all that, but I still stand by. I'll pop 13 on and enjoy it. I still, and again, if it's nostalgia from when you were talking about cassettes before, that's when I owned on cassette because nobody had it on vinyl at the time. So I had to buy the cassette. Whether it's nostalgia or not, I think Reruns, again, a Robert Lamb song, I think Reruns is in my top 5 favorite Chicago tunes of all time. I think it's great. So, but I'm not going to say they're almost 2 different bands, I guess is the best way to put it. But I'm glad that they were able to have, for my sake, that they were 2 different bands, so that I was able to enjoy them for another 40 years, whereas they could have been done by that point.
Oh,
and it probably didn't
absolutely.
break your brain as much where you started fan wise to go back to those early records, right?
Right. My dad didn't really understand it. My dad kind of bailed. My dad was a drummer in bands and while I was growing up, and wedding bands, cover bands, that sort of thing. And he was a huge Chicago fan, and he's one of the guys that got me into the band because I would hear him listen to them all the time. And so he bailed basically at 16 because to him they were not the same Chicago. So my dad, who's obviously he's 23 years older than me, but he was the guy that grew up, and he bought CTA when it came out. He bought Chicago 2 and 3 and everything when they came out, and he saw them on the Chicago 10 tour and all that stuff. So to hear Hard to Say I'm Sorry to him on the heels of Still If You Leave Me Now, and maybe what a big surprise, was like, this is not the band that I grew up loving. So he bailed, and although he's going to see them in concert this week with Earth, Wind & Fire, he's going wow. I think it's his first Chicago concert since I went with him in 1983. So
time heals all wounds.
I'll give you to quote Robert Lamb off 21.
Only time can heal the wounded.
Yes.
See, I thought that's where Jeff was going with that. I just gave you automatic credit, Jeff.
I'm glad you brought up 21 because I think the big question with this group when you're talking about this era is whether or not it was ultimately worth it in the end. Because the kids who fell in love with Chicago with 16, 17, 18, whatever, ultimately were pretty quick to bail on them when trends shifted, or I don't know, whatever you want to say about what happened with 21. Like their new audience wasn't as loyal as these cranky old motherfuckers that were complaining all along. So I think you're right that we would not be talking about it. They certainly wouldn't be touring now if not for that second win. But do you think creatively it was?
I mean, it made them millionaires again. You're right. It did. I mean, it did. The 3 of us we like the songs. Like, so, I mean, I guess creatively it worked for at least 3 idiots. Right. I mean, but to your point about 21, I remember at the time when 21 came out that maybe even I was like, I don't know anymore. Yeah. And in retrospect, I think that album gets a bad rap. I think it's,
I agree.
I think it's a great Chicago album. I mean, there's horns on there. There's up-tempo tunes. There's rockin' tunes. The songs that Chef wrote with his brother is, damn it, I can't think of the
Was
title.
Man to Woman one of them?
I don't. That might be one of the ones that maybe a little slow and sappy. I'm thinking
it's about slow and sappy for sure.
If it were you, I think it's if it were you is what I'm thinking.
That's a good one. Yeah,
and there's horns all over it. So I think it's one of those where, like, I personally think it's a better album than 19. I think 19's the one for me that kind of just isn't Chicago to me. It just isn't. It just isn't them. I think 18 and then jump to 21. That's for me.
I think I'm with you. I like it a lot more now than I did when it came out. When it came out, with Chasing the Wind, I was like, all right, another Diane Warren song. We're going back to the well. This is.
Yeah. Where do you get? I'm curious where you guys land. I know we're kind of going off the track here a little bit, but since you brought it up, I can't figure out where I land with Diane Warren. It's like sometimes I go, you know what? I think I like everything she writes, and then other times I go, I don't think I like a single thing she writes. I can't figure it out.
I think I'm in the same zone. Like, I think that she does what she does very well. And as long as you're hearing it one piece at a time, you're like, oh my God, When I See You Smile, what an amazing song. It's like, if you listen to like 40 Diane Warren songs in a row, like, it's like you're starting to like see the fast food nature of it all.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
So I'm conflicted similarly. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Just bizarre to me. Like when I just, the Cher song that she did, and then the Aerosmith song, though I do not care for at all. And they'll never win me over on that one. But Look Away, I love. But what I love, here's what I say. Would I love Look Away if it wasn't Chicago? Like would if that was just artists, if it was Gregory Abbott, I'll just pull out a name from that area. If it was Gregory Abbott putting out "Look Away," would I love that song? I don't know if I would.
Now I want to hear that. I wish James Ingram had done "Look Away." I have never really liked that song very much. Even when it was popular, I didn't like that song very much.
Fair. I think it's fair to not like it. I think the other song's a better song. The oh Christ, what was the first single?
I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love.
Thank you. I Don't Want to Live Without Your Love. I think that's a better song.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe because I haven't heard it as many times as I've heard "Look Away." Yeah.
Why does 19 not feel like Chicago to you? I'm curious about that.
I don't know. I don't, maybe where I was in life. I don't know. It just kind of, I mean, I still went to see them I still drove to, whatever 8-hour drive from the Chicagoland area to see them. I still was all in on them, but the album just didn't, it just didn't hit me the way that the 16, 17, 18 did. And then, like I said, when 21 hit, I thought I was out, but then in retrospect, like,
I was just going to say the zone for me, like 17, 18, 19, 21, like I was on board like all the way. And 21, to talk about what you guys were saying, like, I mean, I was an emotional teenager. I thought I understood life. So hearing you explain it to my heart, I was like, oh, Jason, you're finally nailing my feelings here.
Yes.
Of course, all those years later, I'm like, I don't know shit, but
we don't, to that point though, even, what is on an album that I love, it's not a great song. That You Come to My Senses, not a great song. But at the time, to your point, Matt, it's like They Get Me.
Yes, I love it.
Come to my senses. Yes, she does come to my senses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also, with 21, I was also pissed off that they didn't do anything live off the album. That they just completely ignored it. They did Hearts in Trouble sometimes, which was the Days of Thunder soundtrack, wasn't even on this album. But that annoyed me. Like, I'm coming to hear, I don't want to hear the songs. This was at a time where they were consistently playing 4, 5, 6 songs off each new album. And, they were doing Heart in Pieces, for Christ's sake, live. And they can't do anything off 21. So it felt like it angered me that they bailed on their own album.
I was angry that Danny was gone.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
No question.
But that was a definite, moment, was like getting, I think I was still innocent enough that when I got Chicago 21, I saw Danny's name was gone, but I'm like, oh, maybe he just had like other plans. I'm sure he'll be at the show. I was delayed on seeing Chicago. Like, I hadn't seen them on the 19 tour or the 18 tour. So 21 was the first time I saw them. And I, since I really enjoyed that record, like you, Jimmy, I was looking forward to hearing songs from the record, and I paid $29.50, which was a lot of money at the time, to see Chicago at basically like a theater in the round, a supper club type of place. But they played an hour, no songs from 21. And even as a teenager that hadn't been burned that many times by shows, I was pissed.
I would be
1 hour.
An hour for $30, which at the time was a lot of dough for a concert ticket. That was that was, what a bummer. I remember, by the way, with Danny missing, that there was the print ad for the Chicago 21 tour that they're coming to wherever they were playing in Chicago at the time. I think I saw it in Milwaukee as well.
They're all on the line.
And they're all in that line. And I remember counting the members, and I had heard the rumor that Danny wasn't in. I'm like, well, the print ad wasn't clear enough. So I'm like, well, there's enough guys. And it didn't make sense to me. Like, that Dwayne was in the photo and Danny wasn't. So it's like, oh, they're all there. So it was like, what do you mean Danny's gone? In my brain, he was still there. And then clearly he was not. So I just don't know how to look at ads, apparently.
Well, okay. We can't talk about people leaving Chicago and talk about Chicago 17 without talking about Peter Cetera. 1985, big year for singers leaving their bands. Peter and David Lee Roth both take a hike after massively successful albums. Mm-hmm. Were you heartbroken? Were you surprised when the news arrived?
Oh, I was a kid. I was devastated. I wasn't a kid. I was 18 or 19 at some point. At some point, I got to be a man in this story. Well, we had been hearing it since his first, that 81 solo album came out, where they would say former lead singer of Chicago. And then, so when he eventually left, it was like, okay, well, they've been saying he's going to be leaving for years. At least the DJs have been saying that, erroneously they've been saying it, but they've been saying it. But it was, to me, it was just devastating because I was all in on him, man. I was, to your point, he's never looked more macho, to quote Matt. And so for him to bail just seemed like, now you guys are on top of the world again. Why would you bail now?
Right.
So yeah, it was heartbreaking to me. And then, to get that 18 and, it took a little while for me to warm up to it because of the lack of Cetera on it. And,
is that right? You were not immediately won over by Niagara Falls. And,
I was not. Although that said, I was at the store. I was living in Pasadena, California at the time. I was at the one record store in town that sold 45s, and I was there the day that the 25 or 6 to 4 86 version was coming out on 45.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I was so excited. Couldn't wait to get it home and listen to it. And I probably listened to it over and over 4,000 times. And
really?
I end up liking it, Jeff. I end up liking it. I don't know why it happened.
After 2,000 spins, how many did it take before Stockholm syndrome set in?
Probably I'm sad to say probably 4. Not even as high as you'd want it to be.
I have never liked that version of that song.
I don't disagree with you. I'm not gonna. I would never argue with you. But again, these were my guys, and I wanted to so badly. Again, I didn't understand it, and I think what was One More Day the flip side of the 45. I forget what the flip of that was, but
that sounds right to me.
Know.
Yeah,
I
like that song.
Yeah, me too. It's a good song, and it was great when they did it live. So before we started, I was going to tell you guys something. So we just did my charity event, Parkcast-a-thon, where we raised money for Smile Train, and this year we ended up raising, I think, close to $150,000.
Amazing
for them. And so one of our guests on the show was a guy named Jeff Babko. I don't know if you guys know Jeff.
Yeah. Yep.
Jeff tours with Steve Martin and Martin Short. He's the keyboard player and comic foil on stage for those two. He's also the keyboardist in Jimmy Kimmel's band. And I've been friends with Jeff for a while. And so Jeff has been coming on my podcast. I guess I probably should say the name, Never Not Funny, for a few years. And so when we did Parkcast-a-thon before the pandemic, when Jeff was scheduled, I have 30 guests on because it's a 12-hour marathon show. When he did it in 2019, he brought Colin Hay with him of Men at Work. Unbeknownst, he's like, hey, I got a special guest. Here's Colin Hay. So here comes Colin Hay. And so this time, Jeff says, I don't have a special guest. I'm like, okay. So please welcome Jeff Babko. Jeff comes out and he's doing this bit. And the bit was that he wrote all these hit songs and he's playing Hard to Say I'm Sorry. And he's claiming to have written it. And then he's playing You're the Inspiration on the keyboard and claiming to have written it. And I'm doing the straight man of, Jeff, you didn't write that. You didn't write that. You didn't write that. And while we're doing this bit, an older gentleman starts wandering through the audience, acting like he's lost and doesn't know where he's at. And that gentleman turns out to be David Foster.
Wow.
Whoa.
He brings David Foster with him. And so then David Foster says, you didn't write it. Clearly they had planned all this. You didn't write any of those. Get out of that seat. And David Foster sits down and we have a sing along with David Foster where we sing Hard to Say I'm Sorry. We sing You're the Inspiration to David Foster playing it. And the whole room is singing along with it. I'm getting chills right now just telling you about it.
Yeah.
And so then David, so he does that. Then David comes on and everybody's segment is only 15 minutes long because I've got so many guests. And so Babco's kicked to the side. Babco's out. Now I just want to talk to Foster. And coincidentally, this is no joke. The night before, I listened to Champlin's Runaway. I listened to Lee Ritenour Rit, and I listened to Chicago 16 the night before. So clearly something was in my head that David Foster is in my world. So, I mean, because he produced all 3 of those albums. And so, but the one question I had for him was, and I think you guys would agree, this is a great question. And again, a way for me to confront these guys to their faces. I hope someday that I get to, apparently he had a great time and he loved it. He actually donated a lot of money. David Foster did. I hope to get a longer interview with him, or at least, my style of interview. It's certainly not as in-depth as what you guys do because I'm a jackass comedian. So my question was, hey, to a kid just graduating high school, you and Cetera seemed joined at the hip. Yet when Cetera left, You stayed with the band who clearly didn't want you, and you didn't go with Cetera. And he went with Michael Amarty. And how does that come to be? Why did that happen? And he, like a politician, skirted that and said, well, I did write the number one hit on it along with Peter. So that's a win.
Yeah.
And everybody applauded. And I saw that as my way of no follow-ups are needed. That's how he wants to answer this. And we move on.
I found when we were prepping for this, I sent it to Matt. Regrettably, I did not send it to you. I will do that. I will repent after we're done here. There was an interview with Foster from '85.
Okay.
They were talking about how he stood to make $1 million off of Chicago 17. A combination of his big production fee plus, I guess he had back end points or whatever. And part of that interview, they're asking him about Cetera leaving. And he says that he pleaded with Peter not to leave the group. He said he was pissed off at him because they had been writing together for the week leading up to Cetera announcing his departure. And Foster claims he was blindsided. He also makes reference to something that I wasn't aware of. Apparently, there was something of a war of words between Cetera and Foster after Cetera left. In the article, Foster's like, yeah, he's out there bad-mouthing me to the press. And I think he says at one point that Peter was, at that point in '85, the best songwriting partner he'd ever had.
Wow.
But they didn't like each other. They didn't get along. So
that maybe that's our answer. Like Peter clearly didn't want him to produce it. He wanted to get away from Foster, right? He wrote the one song with him, and that's it.
I think according to Foster, Cetera tried to do it. He tried to get Foster to produce Solitude Solitaire. Okay. And Foster was like, I couldn't do both. I had to pick one, so I stayed with the band.
Why would he stick with the band? It just makes it still confuses me because again, the band Lamb, none of them wanted him. They didn't like what he was doing, and even though they were successful again, and Cetera clearly, while they didn't like each other, neither did Martin and Lewis. But look what they did.
Yeah.
You know, so why wouldn't they? Again, I will, if I get him back on the show, I will hold his feet to the fire till the son of a bitch gives me an answer.
Please do, because I don't think anybody's ever going to interview Cetera ever again.
To that point, I just talked about this on my podcast. David Foster at the Hollywood Bowl this summer is doing a 75th birthday party. And with a celebration of, it's called You're the Inspiration, a celebration of David Foster's life. I don't know if you guys have seen the ads for it or whatever, but and then
are you going to jump out of the cake?
I'm probably going to get up there and do a couple of minutes, certainly, based on my new friendship with him. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
But it's a list of all the people that are going to be performing. You know, obviously his wife and Jennifer Hudson, and then all these other folks. Cetera's not on the list, and it's like, boy, if he's really retired, if Cetera's not coming out for this. Because whether they hate each other or not, we know that Cetera's done those David Foster and Friends shows around the world with him.
Right. And
if you're not going to show up at the Hollywood Bowl for David Foster's 75th birthday, the guy that kind of brought you back, he's out. He's done. He's 80. He's 80 years old and retired at that point, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a stray Facebook comment recently that basically said that age is becoming a factor for Cetera. So.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, we talked about it via email, you know, the stuff that's happening with Lamb, you know, when I saw them last summer at the Greek, Robert did not seem like Robert to me, both on stage and off stage. And I mentioned to really whoever would listen to me talk, that I would predict that Robert would be the next one to leave the band. And the people I was saying this to, they were like, no way, Robert's in for life. It's Robert. Robert is Chicago. He's never leaving. And to now know that in concert, you know, he does 5 songs maybe, and then somebody else plays the rest of them. So I think age is, in fairness, catching up to all of them. And all of our heroes are at some point going to be like, I can't do this anymore. And we have to accept it and in my opinion, thank them for in this case, Robert Lamb, Peter Cetera, thank them for all the amazing years of enjoyment they gave me. And
absolutely.
And thank you for sticking around till you were 80. How great is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if we think about like our relatives that are of similar age, like, you know, the majority of them in most cases are nowhere in the shape that these guys have been able to maintain into their 70s and late 70s. You know, we were talking on that email chain about John Anderson from Yes, and John Anderson has a solo record coming out in August. He is 79. I believe maybe he turns 80 later this year, but regardless, like he is in amazing shape, and it's like that's kind of like the exception to the rule. Like you don't have a lot of John Andersons that are out there at that age that are still doing what they do at the level that experienced in the
Right.
70s and so on. So for any of these bands where it's just like so and so is taking a reduced role, or deciding to like leave the road or not tour as much or whatever it is, like I completely understand. Like if I'm their age, like I don't want to be out there on airplanes and tour buses and all that kind of stuff. I'm out.
Look, I've been a touring comedian for 35 years, and even I am now down to about 6 gigs a year because I can't take. I'm in a position, luckily, that I don't have to go out every week like I used to. But I'm not 80, man. I'm much younger than that. And
we also don't have as many ex-wives as the members of Chicago.
I certainly don't have as many hits either. So I've got a lot of different things. Yeah, it's by the way, going back to that John Anderson, ever since you mentioned that, I listened to that track. It does sound amazing. I agree with you. But if you guys can talk to him, can we change the artwork on that cover? Boy, oh boy,
It's
is that
atrocious.
Atrocious, to use your word. Oh my God. It's Photoshopped from 1997. It's horrible.
It's appalling. That was my first comment. I haven't even listened to the track. I got the text or whatever from Matt, and that was the only thing I had to say was I think I made a joke
the
about
album cover to Jeff just to make him mad. I'm like, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, Jeff is gonna be furious when I send this to him.
It's embarrassingly bad. I mean, like back when I put out my first CD, which was in 1999, 2000, my apologies. Other comedians would put out album covers that look like that John Anderson cover. And all I would say is, I don't want it to look like that. That's amateur hour. I want it to look like a real album. How John Anderson can put that out in 2024 is beyond. Nobody wants that. Or maybe nobody cares about album art except for the three idiots talking right now. I don't know.
That's the new podcast, The Three Idiots Talking Right Now. Sure. I'm glad you said what you said about touring, though, because you do bring a unique perspective to this, since you have done a large amount, as you say, 35 years worth of touring. So you more than anybody would understand. And it's just been elevated, I think, in recent years with how much of a hassle it is, traveling, getting through, TSA, and just, like everything takes longer. You can pretty much set your watch to the flight's going to be delayed or canceled. Like there's so many factors, a lot of them weather related, that are going to make it more likely than not that you're going to have a challenging travel experience. So I really give credit to all these bands and any of these bands and artists that are out there actually, able to pull off tours and get from one venue to the next, because I don't know how they do it, because like 4 times out of 5, when I travel with my wife, we run into some sort of travel hassle that like the flight gets canceled, delayed, or whatever. So, but obviously these guys, in some cases, they're flying private. There are people that have ways of getting around, making sure they get to the gig where there's a massive guarantee and other insurance factors and all that kind of stuff on the line if they don't show up. But there's a lot more of these bands and artists that are traveling commercial too than you would realize. Like there's it's kind of an elite class, the ones that are traveling private. So, but
and even if you are, even if everything goes right, that's a long day. You spend a lot of time on your ass, and even if everything goes exactly according to plan, you're not feeling great when you get where you're going.
It's a lot. It's funny you say, because very often on the flights that I take, when I do a Friday, Saturday gig, I'll take the first flight out on Friday because I've got to get to the gig that night. If you look at my plane, I would predict that every hair metal guy is on the plane going to where I'm going as well. They all fly commercial because they're all just, at that point, they're just working. It's the bass player from Warrant. I mean, that's a bad example because the bass player from Warrant is great. But you get my point. It's just a guy who may be taking the day off from Guitar Center to then go and do Ribfest and Skokie, and they're on my flight. And if they're delayed, then they don't get to play. You know what I mean? Like it's and it's stressful. It's so I get it. And of course, with the bigger, with the REO or Styx, they're on tour buses that get them from spot to spot, so they don't have to worry about it that much. But like the Stones and stuff, where it's that's got to be private though. Another bad example.
It's got to be, but it's still less sitting on your ass.
Yeah, Although that's another. We're going to see them tomorrow. Just my son and I. And,
they were so good on this tour.
Did you see them already?
Yeah, you're in for a great time.
I saw them on the last tour and loved it in a way that I was surprised. I like the Stones. I'm not the biggest Stones fan in the world. But man, for an 80-year-old man, I don't know, he's 80. He's great.
I had
Okay.
seen them 2002 on the No Security tour, and also like I don't know, Bridges to Babylon, Voodoo Lounge. I think those were basically, and I thought that Jagger was better than any of those three tours. So I was really pretty astounded. Like everything you've seen online as far as the video and stuff like that, it measures up when you see it in person. So
Great. Can't wait. Very excited about it. And I'm a guy that doesn't look at those videos or look at set lists. So I will look at all that stuff after the fact, but because I like to go in surprised. And so, which I don't have to do with Chicago because they haven't changed their set list in 25 years.
Yeah. I saw them twice on the 19 tour, and that's the last time I've seen them.
And that may be the last time. Well, they did the big band tour where they did some different songs. But otherwise it's the same set. And it's a little disappointing because they've got, now they're doing all the songs that, they're doing 25 songs that everybody knows.
Yeah.
But to the guys like me who, I've been around about the first album. Lamb knows that. Do a couple album tracks for the idiots like me that are still coming, throw me a bone. I know that people are going to go to the bathroom at some point anyway. Let them go during that one. Like it's,
I know it was a moment in the 90s, like when they put Alive Again into the set. So it's like there
Yes.
were times where they would put stuff like that into the set. And I think Alive Again has been like, kind of the second set song for a good while now. But like, I agree. Like, I think the last kind of like big moment was really probably when they put like the whole ballet into the set list. That was, and that's kind of become a mainstay, obviously. But at the time, it was like, holy shit, they're playing that,
Yeah. Or even Introduction, which they do, of course, every night now.
Yeah.
To open with it. But when they brought that back, it was like, geez, thank you. And question to that point, though, nobody knows Question 67. Nobody sitting in that audience knows that except for the guys like us. And so, like, you could swap that out with something deep off of 8. You know what I mean? Like, or off of 6 or 5. Let me just give numbers. Off of 13, 12. 12's not even.
Yeah, put in Song for You. Make it happen.
Oh, my God.
Stop it.
Do you remember
14
that
full album performance.
remember the tour where Lee Loughnane did Happy Man for some reason? Why?
Yeah.
Why would you do why would you do a Cetera song? In general, he's gone, other than the number one hits that you have to do. But why would, of all things, it's so associated with Cetera and certainly not you. What a weird choice.
If we go back to 17 for a moment, I'm curious,
Sure.
what do you guys think about the first side sequence going from Stay the Night, We Can Stop the Hurt, and Hard Habit to Break into Only You? Like it was very bizarre to me that you would go from Stay the Night into We Can Stop the Hurt. And like, that was a very odd song 2 choice. I don't mind the sequence of this album overall, but like, as I was listening to it, I'm like, it's very odd the way you go from that song to that song. Then you have Hard Habit to Break. And then it's all, like, you almost kind of take another left turn. Even as much as I like this song, like you take kind of another left turn going into Only You.
What would you have done instead? Just out of curiosity. Because again,
I don't know, because like then when you get to like the end of the first side, which is Remember the Feeling, genius. The way the second side starts off with Along Comes a Woman, like I can't really imagine doing it differently, but it's just like that first part of the first side kind of plays out a little, and maybe a lot of it is just like We Can Stop the Hurt, which at the time when I got the record, I did
not care for that song. Yeah, same.
No. So Jimmy, when you were saying, that you like that song a lot, like I've come around on that song, but at the time, like, when I got the record, like after only, hearing, Stay the Night and Only You initially on the 45, when I heard that as song 2, I was like going, where are we going here? And then it's like, we went to Hard Habit to Break, and it's like, all right, cool. We're back on solid ground, so, but
let me ask you something.
Yeah, sure.
Jimmy might remember, I feel like, isn't Forever the second song on 18?
Which again, yes, maybe Robert Lamb has a clause in his contract.
He's got to have the
I
second
get
song.
song 2 on every album.
Right. And I think Forever is a pretty weird song to put in the second slot too.
Is
So
that in the
maybe
second? What's the first song?
is it
Niagara
Niagara
Falls?
Falls? I think it's Niagara Falls.
That's number one.
Yeah.
We've lost him. He's gone.
Hang on. Yeah, you go. Yeah, you're
Jimmy
right.
actually
Niagara
just
Falls.
left and ran over to the Chicago rehearsal space.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
All right.
Guys, I got to go yell at them about the sequencing. Apparently, what were you guys thinking? And they tolerate me. Yeah, Niagara Falls into Forever, into If She Would Have Been Faithful, 24 Hours 64, Will You Still Love Me?
Yeah,
That's a strong side album.
it is. And maybe I mean I could definitely be wrong about this, but I feel like maybe Foster didn't want the record to blow its load right away, you know?
Maybe
Like he
maybe it was
knew.
also in deference to Lamb. Maybe they were just
Maybe.
like, hey, this guy Saturday in the Park, 25-64. Anybody know what time it is? Let's give him a little bit of respect and not bury his songs last. Maybe.
Yeah, but also a song like Only You know that's not going to be a single. That's side
Right.
B material. But to
Yeah.
put it up front like that, maybe like Foster knew he had Hard Habit to Break, You're the Inspiration. He had these songs in his pocket, and they also had a fair number of ballads too. So
Don't you think Remember the Feeling could have been a huge hit?
yes,
I do. Absolutely.
When I saw that as a B-side, when it was it the B-side for Along Comes a Woman? What was it? The B-side? It was a B-side for something. And I was like, why are you wasting this at a B-side? This is a hit. This is a number
I
one
thought
hit.
so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to as a 10-year-old owning that album, I loved that song.
Oh my God. Just a heartbreaking song. Oh, good God.
I had to consider this, but I have my play. Like Lamb would have beat up people in the studio, but what I would have done, I would have gone Stay the Night into Prima Donna. I think that would have worked, and you just put
wow.
We Can Stop the Hurtin' right near the end of the album, track 9. So that's why it never would have worked, because Lamb would have been like, absolutely not. But I think that like structurally, I think that would have worked to go. That might have been a better transition going from Stay the Night into Prima Donna.
You're probably right, but I don't disagree with that. But I think we're onto something with the fact that it had to be Lamb in that spot to go Cetera, Lamb, and then the duet with Champlin and Cetera, and then Only You back into some Lamb. I mean, and then the Cetera. Yeah, actually, he did a pretty good job of mixing this thing up, didn't he?
He did, absolutely, because the more traditional play would have been like two up tempo songs, with Stay the Night, Prima Donna, into boom, big ballad with Hard Habit to Break.
Well, on that tour, they opened with We Could Stop the Hurtin'. Like that was literally, they would come out to that, which is pretty fascinating that they would.
It's an interesting song.
Yeah.
In like with hindsight, like it's a really cool, and the deeper I got into Lamb's like solo work, like he obviously loves like doing all sorts of stuff like that. I mean, you can only imagine the time that they spent working on that song in the studio. Like it's a very elaborate song compared to the rest of the record.
Agreed. Have you heard Lamb's new song that came out last week?
What?
I just sent that to Jeff, I think so. Or I sent it to somebody. No, I'm sorry, Jeff.
You didn't send it to me? I didn't know existed. He put out a new song last week?
That.
Yeah.
You're
okay,
which I
Jeff.
just saw out of the blue. Yeah.
I'm okay. Is it
okay.
a techno bossa nova song?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was hoping that would not be the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, this is coming from me who a second ago went, I thank you for the 80 years of enjoyment. Like, I couldn't believe, I thought he was kind of getting away with it on, Born for This Moment. It felt like maybe he had one foot in the bossa nova, one foot out, but apparently he's both feet back in. Yeah. Which,
the other new song, Jimmy, did that come out this year from Lamb, or was that prior to this year? Because I saw he had another song as well.
It did, but it's just I think it's the original version of what ended up as New York. What's it called? New York Time on Born for This Moment. What's the name of that one?
Okay.
It's the same
Got
song.
it.
It's just same song with a little bit different lyrics.
Yeah.
So,
classic example of me putting my foot in my mouth. I think I was talking to Lee, and I was like, "It's cool that you guys have been writing with Jim Peterick," and he's like, "Robert's been writing with Jim Peterick."
Oh, God.
yeah, but in fairness to you guys means the band. You guys are you've got songs on your new album co-written by Jim Peterick, who is one of the greatest pop rock writers of all time, in my opinion. But those songs are okay at best, right? The Lamb Peterick stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It was at that point where it's like the album was just kind of like, there's some sort of album coming, but you don't know what it is. So that was as far along as it was there was one way or another, whether I talked to Peterick or whatever, I'd found out that like there were some Peterick songs that were in the mix at that point, so.
It did. And I remember the last time we talked, you guys did not like the new album very much at all. And I was all in on it. And
I came around on the record.
I came around to where you guys were thinking the first time. You and I have swapped places. Like, sounds like Matt. I still will listen to it. But what's that?
I said tag team idiots.
Yeah, it's it was another one where it came out and high school Jimmy popped in where I listened to that album
Yeah.
nonstop for a month, and then it was like everybody's wrong. This thing's great. Like, you know, my friend Gene was, you know, like he goes, "There's a half a good song of that album at best." I'm like, "You're wrong. This thing's great." And then now and again, when it comes on, I enjoy it. If a song comes on in a mix, but it's like, oh man, if this is the end, then so be it. But because I don't see them doing anything else, right? They're done. Aren't they done?
I'm always rooting for one last high note.
But what's it going to be? If it's Lamb and Penko and Locknane, and Lamb is basically gone. So what could it be?
Well, I mean, that's the case live. Maybe he can be bothered to show up into the studio for a week or two. I don't know. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure there won't be. Certainly not another great album out of it, but you always hope. I mean,
you saw the interview that I sent you, Jeff. You know, there was Lee and Robert.
Yes.
It ran this week with Gary Graff, I think in the Detroit area or something like that. And both of them were saying that, like, you know, there's still new music percolating. Really? And yeah, they kind of indicated that they see it.
But no plans to put out an album. They are making music. I think they just, well, I don't know. We'll see. I held out hope for Cetera until the bitter end too. I thought that he, by all rights, should have had one more. He should have gone out on a higher note than he did. Yeah. But
although I like Another Perfect World, I think that's a great album.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you that one more would have been wonderful. By the way, will you send me the link to that interview as well? Because I've not seen that.
Absolutely. We should.
Do we have anything left to say about 17? Is there anything?
When people ask me, you know, as the go-to Chicago guy that everybody claims, or at least the podcaster / comedian Chicago guy that everybody comes to, and they tell me, where do I start? Where, you know, you're the big Chicago fan. Where do I start? You know, I always tell them 1 and 2 and 16 and 17. And those are the places to start. So I still stand by 17 being a great album. Again, it's to go back to what we said before. It is not your Terry Kath era 60s, 70s Chicago. It is certainly different, but it's still it is a phenomenal 1984 album. And I will stand by it. And I think it's in my top 5 Chicago albums. I still think it's great. And I could listen. I don't skip a single song on this album. I like it.
I am sure.
I stand with Jimmy. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure it's the one that I've listened to more than any other.
Yeah. Me too. I think so.
I mean, part of that's because it got a hell of a head start when I was 10 years old and I had it on cassette, but still I have a lot of affection for this record. So I'm very, very, very glad we were able to get together to celebrate its 40th anniversary in style.
Thanks for having me.